Greetings and welcome back to our study in the book of Ezekiel. When we are going to be looking at chapters 6, 7, and 8 today, but before we do, let's go back and do a little review and set the stage for what we're going to be looking at today. If we look at chapters 1 through 3, we see the call and commissioning of Ezekiel by God. Now, when we first look at this, we can see that this is a very dramatic, unusual call that Ezekiel is getting. And one of the first questions that arise in my mind is, why would there be such a tremendous vision for Ezekiel to have before he had the call? Well, as you study the book and get into it more and more, you begin to realize that Ezekiel's call was not normal. He was going to be taking a message of doom to his own people. Now, when he was first called, he was about 30 years old, and Ezekiel was supposed to be the priest to the people. Ezekiel was about 25 years old when the Babylonians first took him in 597, which is known as the Second Siege. With the time of the writing, he tells us in the first verse that it was his 30th year. So we know that he was about 30 years old, and this is the time that he would have taken over the priest position. So he is seeing this vision as God is calling him to not only be the priest to these people that are captured and are now living outside of Babylon in a place called the Kabar Canal, which is a tributary off of the Euphrates River, but that he is also telling him he is going to be the prophet to these people and take God's message to them. Now he tells Ezekiel, I'm not sending you to a strange people or to a strange land or with a strange language. I am sending you to your own people, and I am going to send you to tell them the truth. And if you don't tell them, their blood will be on your hands. But if you do tell them and they reject me, then their own blood will be on their own hands. So this is a very intense call that he's getting. But the question that I often think about is, why would God give him such a miraculous vision of his throne and of the angels around him in his calling? Well, because of the message. This is the answer that I find in the scripture as I come to, and this is an answer that is inferred, it's not specific, but that as he is going to be giving this message, he's going to run across a lot of rejection. He's going to have a lot of heartbreak. His life is not going to be easy. So God had to show him in this vision himself, because when he saw God, then it instilled in him the purpose of whom he was working for, of whom he was prophesying for, and it was God himself. And so we see God in many ways using him in this book, in this passage that he's writing, and he gives him visions, and he tells him how to interpret these visions to the people. And this is what we saw in the first in chapters 4 and 5, is that he is acting out the things that God has told him. Now, God has told him exactly how to act them out. He's not having to come out on his own, but he is acting it out for the people to see. And one of the things that we see is that, especially when he starts in chapter 6, he talks about he's in his own house, and that the leaders, the elders of Jerusalem are there with him. And let's look at these first few verses in chapter 6. He says, the word of the Lord came to him, saying, Son of man, set thy face toward the mountains of Israel and prophesy against them. Now, you should ask yourself, if he's setting his face towards the mountains of Jerusalem, the people aren't there. The people are in Babylon. But he's telling him to turn towards the mountains of Jerusalem and to prophesy against them. Now, part of this is that God is using Ezekiel to tell the people that are in captivity what's going on. Now, this is, remember, they were taken in the second siege. During this time, we also had Daniel and his 3 friends were taken. We also know that Daniel and Ezekiel were students of Jeremiah when they were back in Jerusalem. So these are all contemporaries of the same event. But he tells him, and let's look now at verse 3. He says, and say to them, ye mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Lord God. Thus saith the Lord God to the mountains, and to the hills, to the rivers, and to the valleys, behold, I, even I, will help bring a sword upon you, and I will destroy your high places. Now this may be a little bit confusing, but what he is doing is he is prophesying to the evil spirits, the foreign gods that have bewitched the people of Israel, because they would go up into these mountains, to the groves of trees, to build their idols, to build their altars to these foreign gods. This is where they would commit many of the iniquities, the sins. And iniquity is a sin of rebellion. And so when he's telling them your iniquities, he's talking about their rebellion. And he says in verse 4, he says, and your altars shall be desolate, and your images shall be broken, and I will cast down your slain men before your idols. So he is prophesying about the idolatry that is going on in these hills and in these mountains. So then he continues on and tells them what he's going to do. How that the young men, the pride of the nation, the strength of the nation, the beauty of the nation is going to just be cast down before these idols. In other words, their worship of these idols will bring about not only the destruction, but also their death. Now, when we go on, we find out that there will be a remnant that will be taken out. Remember the hair cutting. He had to do it into 3 pieces. And then he had to chop up 1/3 of his hair. That's the ones that's going to be slain by the sword. Then there was 1/3 of it he threw into the fire. These are the ones that will be burned in the city. And then there was 1/3 of it that was scattered to the wind. This scattering to the wind are the ones that will survive, but they will be scattered into other nations. They will not be staying in Jerusalem. So he tells them in verse 8, yet shall I have a remnant, that ye may have some that escape, the second among the nations, the sword among the nations, when ye shall be scattered throughout the countries. Now, when they escape, they're going to remember, and he tells them that later on, you're going to remember the nations. The job that Israel was given by God back in Genesis was to take the statutes and the commandments of God to all other nations. And it was through Abraham, who was the father of the Jewish nation. It was through him and the Jews that all of the world would be blessed. Blessed with what? Blessed with the knowledge of the God who would love them and would rescue them from the trials, the evils, the wickedness of this world, and that he would be the one that would guide them. But they had to obey his statutes in order to live a life without the wickedness, without the corruption. And we find this in Leviticus 26. Let's turn there for a minute. We're going to go to Leviticus chapter 26. Well, let's start with verse 40. If they confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers with the trespasses which they have trespassed against me, and that also they have walked contrary unto me, and that I have walked contrary unto them. Let's skip down to verse 43 or 42. I will remember my covenant with Jacob and my covenant with Isaac, and my covenant with Abraham will I remember, and I will remember the land. This is the covenant that God made with Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham, that they would have the land and the people. And he has told them over there that they would know that he is God, but that they must obey his covenants. But then he says, I will, and this is in verse 45, I will for their sakes remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought forth out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the heathen, that I might be their God. I am the Lord. These are the statutes, the judgments, and the laws, which the Lord made between him and the children of Israel in Mount Sinai and handed to Moses. This is known as the Mosaic Covenant. Now, this was made back in Leviticus, right after they came out of Egypt. So here he is referring to it again. And if we look at, let's go to chapter 7. Well, before we go there, let's look at chapter 6, verse 13, where he says, he tells them again how they're going to die. They're going to die by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence. Why is this important? Those who are outside will be the first, the farmers, the warriors will be the first, and they will be killed by the army, by the sword. Now, a siege does not let anything in or out of the walls of the city. So they are not getting any food or water in, and they can't leave. And so once they kill those that are outside, then there is no food. Famine will begin to take over. And as they begin to die from famine, then disease is going to take over. So he's telling them how bad it's going to get. But he continues on in verse 13. He says, then you shall know that I am the Lord. This is an ongoing theme. You will know that I am the Lord. He tells them the bad things that happens, and then he says, then you will know that I am the Lord. This is what he's wanting them to know. They are worshiping all of these foreign gods, and we're going to talk about their worship process in a little bit. But they're going to do that, and he's saying that he's going to have to destroy them because of this, and he calls it their abominations. And that's how he's going to do it. Once he destroys them, that's when they'll know that he's the Lord. Why will they know? Because he warned them. He warned them for over 400 years that they shouldn't do it. But they didn't listen. They kept going on. And so he's going to say, you will know when the things I have warned you about come to pass, then you will know that I am the Lord. In other words, they had the prophecies, and the prophecies will come true 100%. Therefore, it is from the Lord. And this is an ongoing thing that he uses. This is what he wants. He wants them to recognize him as their God. Let's move on to chapter 7. And we're going to look at, let's start with verse 3. He says, now is the end come upon thee. He's not warning him anymore. He's saying, it's coming. And I will send my anger upon thee, and will judge thee according to thy ways, and will recompense upon thee and thine abominations. This is what he had told them in Leviticus that was going to happen. And this word abominations is used frequently. He calls it abominations. And we talked about in the last video that an abomination is something that is morally, one's moral sensibilities. And it is also has a connotation of danger to the one who is doing it. So he says, he tells them that, let's look at verse 7. He says, the morning is come unto thee, O thou that dwellest in the land. The time is come. The day of trouble is near, and not the sounding again of the mountains. He's saying the time is coming. you have continued in this worship of these idols. Now, in verse 8, I will shortly pour out my fury upon thee. He's telling them it's going to happen, but he's saying it's not happening right now, but it's going to happen in the near future. And I will accomplish my anger there. I will judge thee according to thy ways, and will recompense thee for all of your abominations. Again, we've got the Mosaic covenant. And he says in 9, my eye shall not spare, neither will I have pity. I will recompense thee according to thy ways and your abominations that are in the midst of thee, and you shall know that I am the Lord that smiteth. I am the Lord. And he's telling them, when this happens, I'm telling you it's going to happen. Again in verse 10, he says, behold, the day. And when he says behold, he's saying, this is important. Listen, it is come. The morning is gone forth. The rod has blossomed. Pride has budded. And he's saying you've gone too far. That's all he's saying there. The rod is an emblem of the authority of the king. But he's saying this rod, this authority, not only do they have it, it has blossomed. You've gone too far. You can't go back. And he says in 11, violence, this is how he knows it's gone too far, is risen up into a rod of wickedness. That rod of authority that is supposed to rule in all gentleness and fairness and justice is now become a rod of wickedness, of corruption, of one man against the other. And they shall remain in their multitude of any of theirs, neither shall they be wailing for them. Not only is it going to be wickedness and corruption and violence, human and the humanity of man against man, but it's also going to be no one to help. That everyone is going to be in their own mind. The time is come. The day draws near. Let not the buyer rejoice, or the seller, for wrath is upon the multitude. You're even going to throw your silver and your gold out into the streets. Things are going to be so bad. But by this time, there is no out. It is just going to happen. It says so bad, you're going to take your wealth that you've been accumulating from off the backs of others. Now, for the most part, a lot of this is going to the elders and to the other priests and the leaders of the community. And this is also what's happening back in Jerusalem. Because the priests had begun to take bribes and were more interested in taking money than they were in teaching the statutes and the laws and the commandments of God. Because if they taught these, then people would follow them, and the wickedness and corruption would not exist. But as they're doing this, they're saying, when you've collected all this money and now you're going to throw it in the streets, trying to get people to recognize you, trying to rescue you, and I'm talking you being the ones that are corrupt, it's not going to help. It doesn't matter. Nobody wants it. It's worthless. And I am recording this in June of 2025, June 15th. On June 14th, there was a day of celebration of 250 years of American military. But to counter this, those who have been in authority in the past and have now lost that authority threw their money out to others to go into the streets and to protest the authority that God has placed in the leadership of our nation. This is similar to what's happening here in Ezekiel's day. The authority of the people or the authority of the leadership over the people is now being exposed. And Ezekiel's doing the exposing. He is the one that, he's not real popular, but because he's exposing this. But he's telling them because if the people know and they see it happen, it's at that point they're going to say, we were wrong. We were worshiping the wrong God. Our God, the God of Israel, Yahweh, is the one who is causing this to happen. Now, if we go down to verse 10, he tells him that, well, there's a but, which is a term of contradiction. So we've seen that. But and he again reiterates, the sword, the famine, and the pestilence. He keeps telling him, this is how they're going to be destroyed. And the land is going to be destroyed. But they, in verse 16, but they that escape of them shall be on the mountains like doves of the valley, all of them mourning because of his sins of rebellion. All hands will be feeble, all knees will be weak as water. Then they shall gird themselves with sackcloth, and horror shall cover them, and shame shall be upon their faces, and baldness upon their heads. What this is saying, again, let's look at what's going on in our own nation, because it is such a picture of what Ezekiel is saying. And what they're saying, those who have been in authority, those who have taken advantage of the people and have stripped their money from them, in our terminology, we see it as the taxpayer money that has been foolishly spent on things that had nothing to do with our culture or with our people or with God's authority in our nation. But they have spent that money, and now then that it is being exposed by that, their anger is increasing so much to the point that they are beginning to slam each other, and they're making just wild accusations because of their corruption being exposed. And this is what's happening. They're going to mourn, and they're going to make themselves the victims. Look at poor me, at what they're doing to me. Well, what they're doing is exposing their sin, their iniquity, their wickedness, their corruption over the people that they are supposed to be in leadership over. Instead, they were using them to line their own pockets. Now that their money has no power, their money cannot buy them influence anymore. Now then, they're going to escape. He says, escape to the mountains. They're going to go into hiding, so to speak, and they're going to mourn that their iniquities have been exposed. They're not repenting. This is what he's trying to say. They're not repenting. They're trying to get back at those who have exposed them. So he says, let's go down to verse 20. Is where he changes, as for the beauty of his ornaments. To understand that, the beauty of his ornaments is what God gave Israel. He gave great beauty. This is found in Samuel, in Kings, when Solomon built the temple. All the people brought jewels and gold, and they built this beautiful temple for them. And it was the ornaments that God gave them to bring this beauty about among them, so that they had this place to worship. Instead, they took those emblems, those ornaments of beauty, and put them on these blocks of wood or molten images of metal to decorate these idols to these horrific foreign gods. And so when he says in verse 20, is the beauty of the ornaments, he said it in majesty. During the time of Solomon, Israel was the wealthiest nation that has ever been. There has never been another nation as wealthy as Israel was during the time of Solomon. He had great wealth and beauty in that country. He also had great widespread authority. So he's saying, but they made the images of the abominations out of their detestable things therein. And he says, therefore, I set it far from them. He's taking away The beauty that God gave them to begin with, he's going to take it far away from them. Babylon is like being on the other side of the world from Israel to the people. They are going to go far away. And he says in verse 23, I will give it into the hands of strangers for prey, and to the wicked of the earth for spoil, and they shall pollute it. So he's saying, I will take my beauty. And one of the things that Nebuchadnezzar did is he took all of the ornaments and all of the dishes and the things that were used in the temple, and he took them and brought them to Babylon and used them as display, and did not use them for sacrifice or for worship, but used them for parties and glory. We'll see that later on too. And in verse 22 he says, my face I turn away from them, and they shall pollute my secret place. Now remember this, my secret place, for the robbers shall enter in and defile it. The robbers were the ones who took the glory that God had given and put it in front of these idols. The next thing he says, tell the people to make a chain. Hold hands and make a chain. What he's telling him here is that you're going to be in bondage. You're not going to be able to escape. This chain is going to be tight. And he says in verse 24, therefore I will bring the worst of the heathen, and they shall possess their houses. I will bring the pomp of the strong to course, and their holy places shall be defiled. Verse 25, destruction cometh, and they shall seek peace, but there will be none, because God has removed, he has taken away. Mischief shall come. And then in verse 27 he says, the king shall mourn, and the prince shall be clothed with desolation. And he's talking about the leaders of Jerusalem. And the hands of the people of the land shall be troubled. I will do unto them after their way, and according to their desires will I judge them, and they shall know that I am the Lord. So again in in chapter 7 he's saying that. Now let's move on to chapter 8, and in 6 and 7 he's telling them what's going to happen. But in chapter 8 we first see that Ezekiel is sitting in his house with the elders around him, and then the hand of God, or he sees a vision of this person that is fire from his torso down with flames coming up around his torso. Now we saw a little bit of this in the first vision. This was the vision of the image of the angels that surrounded them. That it was like fire, it was like bronze, burnished amber. So it's very beautiful, but he sees a hand comes out of one of these images and takes him by the head and lifts him between heaven and earth. Now, there are right now, scientifically, or the last that I heard, there are 11 different realms. Time, we have the ones that we know are time, height, width, depth, and time. So those are the 4 that we know of. But there are also other realms above us that we do not see, and there have been recognized at least 11. Somewhere in these realms, they have set Ezekiel to see a new vision. Now this vision is going to be one that is going to break his heart. But this vision is also given from the point of view of the angelic and of God. It's not an earthly vision, but it is a true vision. It is a vision that God sees, and that's what makes it real. Now let's look and see what he says, what he sees in this vision. He tells him to go into the temple, and he says, go in the door. I'm in verse 3, the last sentence. Go to Jerusalem, to the door of the inner gate that looketh toward the north, where was the seat of the image of jealousy, which provoked me to jealousy. There, at the north gate, he says, there's this image of jealousy. What is he talking about there? What has happened in the temple that there is a real image that is set up there. Most scholars and linguists believe that it could have been an image of Asherah, Asarah, who was considered the wife of Baal, which many in New Age and witchcraft, they will say that Asherah is the wife of God. That is not true, but that was they made her the consort or the wife of Baal. They put her image in the temple. Now, why this is so gross, there's an image here on the screen that you can see the grossness of it. That there's many different images of her, but one of them is there's usually some kind of growth on each side of her with ibex on their hind feet. She's usually very large-breasted, maybe holding twins, that she was supposed to be the mother of these twins, breastfeeding them, and then with her female parts exposed. Now, these are images that they have, or her female genitalia exposed. This is one of the images. There's many different ones that people have taken the writings and come up with these images from them. But this would have been what was sitting at the north gate of the temple. Now, to make this more realistic, imagine your own church, and you go in, and as you're going in, you see an altar, you see maybe a choir loft, maybe you see different things set around in your church according to the worship of your church. But the main thing you're going to see is an altar. Some have one, some have two, some have musical instruments. But that's what you're going to see. But in this, he walks in, and what does he see? This gross, gross image that is sitting there. And God says, that's the seed of jealousy. The image of jealousy that you have used to provoke me to jealousy. He is jealous of his own people because they are worshiping this foreign god. This horrific, gross, perverse goddess that they're worshiping. And he says to them, in verse 3, and verse 4, behold, now this is important, the glory of the Lord of Israel was there, according to the vision. In other words, Ezekiel saw this image, but he also saw the Shekinah glory of God in the temple. Now this is important because here's what's going to happen next. He says, unto the Son of Man, lift your eyes, and now the way toward the north. So I lifted my eyes, this is Ezekiel talking, the way towards the north, and behold, to the gate of the altar, this image of jealousy in the entrance. He said, furthermore, unto me, Son of man, seest thou what they do, even the priest, the great abominations that the house of Israel commits here. These abominations are going on in the house. Now he's going to tell us exactly what those are in a little bit. That I should go far off. Now listen to this. They do this. They're doing this in God's temple that Solomon built with all this beauty. And he says, they are doing this. It's bringing me to jealousy to the point that I have to leave. And this is what he's saying to him. I should go far away, but don't turn away yet. Thou shalt see even greater abominations. Now he's telling him that he's going to have to leave the temple. But he doesn't want him to leave yet because God wants him to see everything that God sees. So he starts into these chamber of horrors of idolatry. And the next thing in verse 7, he brought me to the door of the court. And when I looked, there was a hole in the wall. And then he said to me, Son of man, dig into that wall. And when I had dug into the wall, behold, I saw a door. And he said, go in. And behold, the wicked abominations that they do there. Look at what they're doing in my house, is what he's saying. Go through that door. So I went in and I saw. What did he see? Well, he tells us, every form of creeping things and abominable beast, and of all the idols of the house of Israel, portrayed upon the wall round about. They had put images. When I read this, if you've seen the Lord of the Rings, when the three dwarfs, or not dwarfs, I can't think what they're called now, the Frodo and his friends, Samwise, when they're running away from these orcs and they're hiding underneath this kind of a culvert-like area, and these orcs are coming along on their horses, and when they get even with them, all of a sudden you see centipedes and worms and scorpions and all kinds of horrible things that start crawling around on this wall around Frodo and Samwise. And this is kind of what image that I see when he goes in there and he sees all these images of all of these creatures on the walls of the temple. The temple where it was spread with gold and dressed with ornaments that are now removed and put on these idols. And now then all of these creepy crawlies, snakes, eels, all these things that are on there that are just imaged upon this wall. Now that's enough. You walk in there and you see all that. That's enough to make you want to run. But he tells him to keep going on. He says in verse 13, there stood before them, this even gets worse, 70 men of the ancients of the house of Israel. This is the 70 leaders. Paul calls them the Sanhedrin. They were the leaders, the priests, and in the midst of them stood Jazaniah, the son of Shaphan, with every man his censer in his hand, and a thick cloud of incense went up. Now, Shaphan was one of the priests that was against Jeremiah, and you can find him in the book of Jeremiah. But this is his son, and they all have their censers. Now, what's important about the censers? The censer is, you still see them in Catholic churches today, but they have a kind of a little pot that holds the fire, and as they wave it, and the smoke, and it's got an incense of scent inside it. So as they wave it around, the smoke goes out. Now, in the worship that God gave them in Leviticus, they were to take some of the fire that was burning on the altar in front of the Holy of Holies and put in their censers and take it out. And this was the Lord's blessing upon them. But the altar that had the fire of incense, was the prayers of the people. And it says it went up to the Lord as a sweet-smelling aroma. So what they have done is taken the prayer altar, and they have taken that fire, which the prayers are fire. They are powerful. Prayers are powerful, and they're kept there. And they've taken that, put it in these little balls on a chain, and they're using that, but they are perverted prayers to the foreign gods. They have taken the worship of God, and they are using it in the worship of these foreign gods, these idols. And these gods are nothing. The spirit, Paul tells us, the spirit behind them is a demon. But these foreign gods are manipulating the people through the leadership. But he says, and then in verse 12, then he said, have you not seen the ancients of the house of Israel do in the dark, every man in the chamber of his imagery? For they say, the Lord sees us not. The Lord has forsaken the earth. They think they're doing it without him seeing it. And here's even worse. It's not over yet. It's still getting worse. Because the next thing he says, go in again and look at even a greater abomination. And he brought him to the door, verse 14, to the gate of the Lord's house, which was toward the north. And behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Now, Tammuz is a god. He's known very well in Babylonian mythology. And he was the god of the seasons. And so every year, when winter came, Tammuz would die, and they would weep over him. Now, all of these are fertility gods for the purpose of bringing better crops so they can make more money, so they can have more wealth. So when Tammuz dies, his wife, Osiris, is mourning for him, so the women are mourning with her, and they bake cakes to give to him, or to give to her in recognition, because Tammuz died in a battle that when the one that slew him cut him up into many tiny pieces. And so Osiris goes around all of the earth and grabs all these pieces of Tammuz and brings them back and puts them all back together. And the women weeping are supposed to bring him back together and bring him whole again. But they found all of them except his male genitalia. And in that, they are weeping, because without that, there is no fertility. There will not be good crops. So they are weeping and worshiping, hoping to bring back the fertility. And this is in God's temple that they're doing this. Get this image. God is showing him the horrific idolatry that is going on in his house. Now he goes on. Let's move on to what he does. He brings him in verse 16. Bring him into the inner court of the Lord's house, and behold, at the door of the temple of the Lord, between the porch and the altar, were about 25 men, with their backs toward the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east, and they worshipped the sun towards the east. They have not only used the temple, they have now turned their backs on, and they are worshiping the gods of the east. Now, during this time, the religions of the east that we know now were becoming known at that time. Things such as Buddha, Confucianism, Jainism, all of these things were Eastern religions that they were building up. And he's saying the leaders, 20 men, have turned their back on the temple of God and upon God's statutes to turn towards these Eastern gods. And they are worshiping them. And then he says in verse 17, Hast thou seen this, O son of man? Is it a light thing in the house of Judah that they commit the abominations which they commit here? And they have filled the land with violence, and have returned to provoke me to anger, and they put the branch to their nose. Now this is kind of confusing, because I had a hard time figuring out exactly what that meant. Well, in the process of worshiping maybe these Eastern gods, that their worship process included taking let's just be plain. Opium was a big thing in the East, and they would put it in their nose. Opium was the plant, and then they would put it to their nose to have this opium high. So when it says put the branch to their nose, he's saying that they're bringing these plants that are causing these things to happen, hallucinations, that they were losing their sensibilities. That's what it's talking about. They put their branch to their nose. They were snorting cocaine, heroin, to put it in blunt terms. And this is why he is saying they've lost it. When they've gone that far, there's no getting to them. There's not going to be any repentance. And he says, therefore, because of that, I will deal in fury. My eye shall not spare, neither will I have pity, and throw their cry in my ear with a loud voice, yet I will not hear them. There is no pity from God once the rebellion has gone so far that the worship of the idol, the worship of the foreign god, has become so much that one has given voluntarily their life to them. In the same way, we see in our culture, in our churches today, people voluntarily giving their life over to alcoholism, to drugs, to sexual immorality, to greed, to these things. These are idols. These are the same idols, the same foreign gods, the same demons that were here in Ezekiel. They haven't changed. They have only changed their methods according to the people that they're working after. Who are they after now? Not just the Jerusalem, not just the Israelites. They're after the Christians as well. This applies to us today. Our temples, our churches are being perverted with idolatry, that where it has become a time of entertainment, of all about me, that God's got to bless me, and the songs that are sung are all about what God's going to do for me. We accept abortion, we sacrifice our children. All of the things that he is talking about here are happening in our Christian churches today. And at the end, this is all we're going to cover today. But I think that I would ask you humbly from my heart that you would take this lesson and that you would read this again with understanding, and that you would pray over our nation, over our churches, as they begin to fall into the same trap. Because the Babylonian captivity is a precursor, it is a prophecy of what's going to happen in the end times. Pray for those you love. Proclaim the gospel, because it is the hope of our nation. Proclaim the gospel. It is the hope of the individual, because our hope is in Christ and in being with him in eternity. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will look forward to seeing you next week when we're going to learn more about what the abominations are. Thank you.